Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Madison has always been meticulous with her commitments. When the invitation for the college alumni meeting arrived, she hesitated. She thought about refusing, saying she had another event or that she needed to accompany Lucas with something. But something inside her was stronger: curiosity. Not just to see old friends, but because Raphael might be there. It had been years since they last saw each other, and yet his name occupied a space she would never admit out loud. Lucas suggested she go, even excited about the idea. He said she deserved a light night, to relive good times. She smiled, thanked him, and went ahead with the plan, carrying inside her a nervousness she pretended was common anxiety. Raphael was there. Exactly as she remembered. His beard was fuller, some strands of hair had turned gray, but the smile, the one that always made her forget the world, was intact. They greeted each other like old friends, exchanged jokes, talked about life, laughed about the past. It was supposed to be nothing more than a reunion, a toast, a hug, and that was it. But when he said goodbye and held her hand for a second longer, Madison felt the weight of what was hidden beneath the surface. The following days were marked by discreet messages. At first, comments about the event, inside jokes, memories of professors, parties, trips. Then came the compliments. "You still have the same look," he wrote once. She took her time to reply, but she did. And when she did, she gave the excuse that she was just being polite. Lucas didn't suspect anything. He worked a lot, traveled frequently, trusted her with ease. And this made everything even more dangerous. Madison started to schedule lunches with Raphael. She called them meetings with colleagues, social gatherings, even invented a fake project with alumni to justify the more frequent meetings. Lucas, always busy and without time, accepted the explanations naturally. Trusted so much that he never considered checking or questioning. Meanwhile, each lunch became more intimate. The eye contact lasted longer. The touches became more frequent. And then came the kisses. Without declarations, without promises. Just the shared silence of someone who knew they were going too far, but kept going anyway. She began to divide her emotional routine. Her daily life with Lucas was stable, predictable, full of affection, but also of comfortable silence. With Raphael, everything seemed more alive. Every unexpected message brought an adrenaline rush. Every meeting felt like an escape from the reality she herself had built. And the most curious thing was that, even deep in this dangerous game, Madison still saw herself as a good person. As if it was just a phase, a small deviation. Something that could be forgotten later, swept under the rug when life returned to its tracks. During one of those lunches, Raphael asked if she was happy. She laughed. Disguised it. Said yes. But the question echoed. That night, she lay next to Lucas, who slept peacefully, and looked at the ceiling as if expecting an answer to appear there. She began to notice details she used to ignore. The way Lucas placed his cup on the table carefully, how his eyes searched hers when telling stories about work, the genuine effort he made to see her smile. All of it was still there. But the space Raphael occupied in her mind started to push those gestures into the corner. Over time, Madison lost count of how many meetings she had with Raphael. The secret relationship evolved without needing to give a name to what they lived. There was desire, nostalgia, and a kind of distorted comfort, as if there she could return to who she was before so many responsibilities and routines. She swore to herself that she could stop. That she was just giving in to a temporary weakness. That things would go back to normal soon. But what she felt for Raphael stopped being a memory and became presence. A constant, invasive presence, disguised as a text message or random memory. There was a day when Lucas suggested a couple's trip to revive their connection from the dating days. He seemed excited. Talked about beaches, trails, wine. Madison faked enthusiasm, but inside she shrank. The idea of being alone with Lucas sounded more like guilt than relief. She started avoiding the topic, saying they were too busy, that the timing wasn't right. On the other hand, Raphael spoke about the future naturally. Reminded her of what they were, what they could have been, what they could still be. This confused her even more. Like she was being pulled in two directions, but without the courage to let go of either. At that point, Madison already lied naturally. Said she was with friends when she was with Raphael. Made up non-existent commitments. And every time Lucas smiled, offered flowers, or said he loved her, she felt a heavier weight in her chest. A growing fear that all of it would come out someday. But also a strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, she deserved that risk. Like she was testing the limits of what she was capable of hiding, feeling, sharing. And so she continued. Pretending that life was the same, even though she already knew she had crossed an invisible and dangerous line. A line that, once crossed, doesn't allow a return. She believed she still had control. That she could stop whenever she wanted. That everything was under her command. But the heart, that one, had already chosen a different path. And Madison would only understand the real consequences when it was too late. Madison's first reaction to seeing the pregnancy test was silence. She stood there, staring at those two pink lines as if time had stopped just for her. Her heart raced, her thoughts were confused, and the strange feeling that everything she had postponed was now in front of her. The impulse was to hide the test, put it at the bottom of the bathroom drawer, and pretend that none of it was happening. But the nausea, the morning sickness, the mood swings, and that discomfort growing inside her made it clear that her body was changing. And changing the body was easy to notice. What really scared her was what came along with it, guilt growing alongside doubt. She tried to think rationally. Did calculations, recalled dates, looked for signs. But no matter how she reorganized the facts, the timeline insisted on showing that the chances of the baby being Raphael's were real. And this consumed her. She tried, at all costs, to cling to the possibility that Lucas was the father. Not just because he deserved it, but because it would simplify everything. If the baby was his, she still had a thread of hope. She could pretend, move forward, bury the past with Raphael as something isolated, an emotional mistake justified by boredom, routine, time. But this thought always came loaded with anguish that weighed more than any morning sickness. Lucas found out about the pregnancy a few days later. He was excited, almost emotional. Hugged Madison like thanking her for an unexpected gift. Started talking about names, styles of cribs, plans for the future. Said he finally felt like their lives were taking a new step. And while he spoke with sparkling eyes, she smiled on the outside, but inside she felt something breaking. In silence, Madison wished that everything was simple. That guilt was just an exaggerated reflection of conscience. That time would help her forget what she lived with Raphael. But Raphael's presence seemed to grow too, parallel to the pregnancy. Raphael became more present. Started sending messages at different times, with words that left Madison uneasy. Said he had been thinking about her, that he felt a strange connection, that sometimes he dreamed of things he couldn't explain. She tried to change the subject, distract, didn't reply immediately. But each message was like a mirror, reflecting everything she tried to hide from herself. He still didn't know about the pregnancy, and this made her even more nervous. She wanted to tell him, but lacked the courage. Because by telling, she would create another version of the story. One that involved more than feelings, more than nostalgia, it involved a child. And this would make everything more real, heavier, harder to erase. She even wrote a message to him telling him. Typed everything. Each detail, each sensation, even the fear she felt. Stared at the text for minutes, then deleted it. Thought about calling, but gave up. Thought about writing a letter, but found it childish. Deep down, Madison knew she was delaying not just a conversation, but a decision. Any movement in that direction would bring a consequence. And she still didn't know which of them had enough strength to sustain. Meanwhile, her belly grew, and with it, the need to pretend that everything was fine. She started to distance herself from her meetings with Raphael. Said she was busy, that commitments were intense, that she needed to focus on work. He questioned, demanded, asked if she had done something wrong. And she said no, that she was just tired. But the truth was that her conscience was imploding. Sharing a bed with a man who dreamed of a child who might not be his, while exchanging messages with the other who might be the father, and all this exhausted her more than the pregnancy itself. Each ultrasound was a mix of emotions. Lucas held her hand and smiled as he watched the baby on the screen. Commented on the size of the hands, the shape of the head, tried to find similar traits between the two of them. And Madison remained silent, with a trembling smile, hoping that this pixelated image wouldn't reveal any detail that would expose what she most wanted to hide. The weight of lies seeped into every detail of the routine. In the gaze, in the touch, even in the way she avoided certain topics with Lucas. He noticed small changes, but interpreted them as anxiety, hormones, fear of being a mother for the first time. The days became long and confusing. At night, Madison spent more time awake than sleeping. Replayed scenes with Raphael in her mind, tried to remember accurately the dates. Thought about doing the test during the pregnancy, but feared what she might find. Lucas started setting up the nursery. Painted the walls, chose the wallpaper with teddy bears, assembled the crib carefully. With each new detail, she felt a bigger squeeze. All of that was being done by someone who believed in a version of the story that no longer existed. A story built on silent promises, but now contaminated by another reality. Madison lived the paradox of wishing the baby was Lucas's, while deep down fearing it was Raphael's, because if it was, everything would be lost. She tried to cling to faith, prayed before sleeping, asked for a miracle, looked for signs. Tried to convince herself that it was just an emotional outbreak. That the odds were still in favor of Lucas. That perhaps her body had reacted differently to time, that stress had altered her cycle, that there was some hidden detail that would change the calculation. But everything she found was the same cold and direct math, always pointing to the same place. And while the world around her seemed to celebrate the new life growing inside her, Madison slipped into a silent countdown. Each day bringing her closer to the moment when she would no longer be able to avoid the truth. And the fear of losing everything she had began to mix with the fear of having to continue living with something she could no longer hide. Madison didn't plan to tell, but the weight had already become greater than silence. After days of brooding, she wrote to Raphael saying she needed to see him. He suggested a discreet coffee, like in the old days. When they sat down, she barely managed to look him in the eyes. Fiddled with the napkin, feigned interest in the menu, avoided saying what had brought her there. Raphael waited for some confession, but not that one. When she said she was pregnant and believed he was the father, there was a moment of disbelief. The smile that followed surprised Madison. He said he always knew there was something bigger between them, that this explained what he had felt since reuniting with her. He held her hand firmly and said it was fate uniting them again. This changes everything, he said, with a conviction that left her speechless. Raphael began to imagine a life together, asked if she saw herself with him and the child. Madison, scared, nodded, but a knot formed inside her. That scene seemed taken from a script where she had never planned to be. She had created a situation where two lives believed in a truth that was still possibly a lie. A few days later, reality began slipping through her fingers. Madison was on the couch when Lucas asked to borrow her phone to look for an old document. She froze inside, but handed over the device with the most neutral expression she could manage. Feigned getting up to get something, trying to seem natural. From the other side of the room, Lucas touched the screen, looking through files and old emails. Until he stopped. He stayed still, staring at the notification that had just appeared. A short, clear, definitive message: "I can hardly wait to see our son grow." Raphael's name was printed at the top. His face lost its shine. He slowly raised his eyes, as if needing to confirm that this was real. His body didn't tremble, but the silence seemed louder than any reaction. Madison approached. Tried to say something, but her voice failed. Lucas simply extended the phone, without raising his tone, without making a scene. He just said, "What is this?" She sat in front of him and began to cry before even managing to organize her words. Didn't try to lie. She knew it was useless. She started talking. From the reunion with Raphael, the secret meetings, the confusing feelings, the moment she realized that maybe the child she carried was from another man. She said it wasn't planned, that everything had escaped her control, that she still loved Lucas. He listened in silence. Didn't ask questions. Each sentence of hers was a new wound, a confirmation of what he had never imagined. Madison told him even about the conversation with Raphael, about the meeting where she believed the baby was his. Admitted that she wasn't sure. Confessed her fear, her despair, her guilt. After everything was said, Lucas exploded. Screamed with fury she had never seen before. Cursed, accused, repeated that he felt humiliated. Walked back and forth saying that he had trusted her more than anyone. Asked how she had the courage to smile at him after every meeting with another man. She tried to explain, said she was confused, that she never meant to hurt him, but every word only made him angrier. Until he stopped, breathing heavily, and said that he needed to know the truth, even though he already knew what it would be. He wanted to do the DNA test. Said he deserved it, not out of hope, but for clarity. That regardless of the result, the marriage had ended there. He picked up the phone and called the clinic. Booked the test for 2 days later. Hung up without looking at her, went to the bedroom, threw a suitcase onto the bed, and started filling it with clothes. She remained motionless, silently listening to the sound of zippers and opening drawers. Lucas left the house shortly after, without giving any deadline for returning, without saying where he would sleep. Just grabbed the car keys and left. The door closing behind him sounded like the end of something that until recently seemed indestructible. The next 2 days were a silent torture. Madison barely ate. Slept little, and when she did, woke up from confusing dreams with faces judging her. Thought about the child, tried to talk to him as if he could already hear her, asking for forgiveness before he even understood what it meant to be betrayed. When the test day arrived, she and Lucas didn't exchange words. Entered the clinic like strangers. The nurse explained the procedure, collected the samples, and said the results would be ready in a week. Lucas thanked her, left without looking back. She left by another route. During that week, Madison gathered courage and called Raphael. Told him everything. Said that Lucas had found out, that the test had been done, that he had left home, and that the marriage was on the brink. From the other side of the line, Raphael fell silent for a moment, and then replied with a phrase that left her conflicted. Said he didn't celebrate her suffering, but that he felt relieved. That now the path was free. And that maybe, after all, they could finally be what life tried to prevent back then. Madison hung up and stared into nothing, unsure whether it was hope or just the extension of another wrong decision. The week passed as if each hour had the weight of a day. Madison felt time flowing around her while trying to keep her mind occupied. The phone never left her side. At any moment, the call from the clinic could arrive. And it did. A polite voice confirmed that the test result was available. She hung up and called Lucas, who answered with a dry voice. He said he already knew, that he had read the email. The baby was his. He didn't celebrate, didn't show relief, just confirmed what seemed not to change what was already decided. Madison asked if they could talk. He said there was nothing to talk about. His voice was firm, but burdened with bitter frustration. The dream of becoming a father, which he had nurtured for so long, had taken a distorted form. He imagined this experience as something pure, shared, full of love and complicity. It didn't involve doubt, nor a test, nor infidelity. Lucas spent a few minutes in silence after she insisted. Then said that he had thought a lot, that he had time to feel anger, pain, and weigh everything he had lived with her. And now that he knows the child is his. And precisely because of that, the child will be raised with love. Said that the child didn't deserve to carry the weight of the choices his parents made. That he would be a present, caring father, who would be there for every stage of the child's life. But that he couldn't look at her anymore without remembering everything that was broken. The trust he had in Madison, once intact, was now a painful memory. He concluded by saying that he had initiated the divorce process. That his lawyer already had the documents and that she would be notified in the coming days. When he hung up, Madison was paralyzed. That confirmation, although expected, weighed more than she imagined. Lucas had decided to continue as a father, but not as a husband. The chance to rebuild what they had dissolved like fragile glass in trembling hands. She tried to recompose herself. Took a deep breath and grabbed her phone. Called Raphael. He answered on the second ring. She told him, without beating around the bush, that Lucas had initiated the separation process. Raphael reacted with surprise, then with restrained excitement. Said that was what he had already imagined. That finally they were free, that now they could build something together, without ghosts between them. Madison stayed silent for a few seconds. She needed to say the rest. With a low but firm voice, she said the test had come out. That the baby was Lucas's. On the other side, silence was immediate. Raphael didn't respond right away. She insisted, but this doesn't change what we have. He breathed deeply, and his voice changed. Said it didn't make sense. That he was sure the child was his. That something was wrong. Madison tried to calm him, said that even so, they could continue together, that the child didn't need to be an obstacle. Said that it was something they could face together. That they could love that boy, even though he was the son of another man. Raphael stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then responded with a coldness she hadn't expected. Said he didn't want to live under the shadow of another man at home. That he wasn't born to raise someone else's child. That the feeling he harbored for her wasn't strong enough to ignore that fact. Madison tried to insist. Remembered all the times he said he loved her, that he dreamed of a life with her. But Raphael was direct. Said that this child changed everything. That he needed to move on with his own life, and that she should do the same. Apologized for not being the man she wanted. His voice was already distant. Before she could say anything else, he hung up. She stayed there, with the phone still in her hand, staring at the emptiness. Heavy breathing, dry throat. The rejection was hard, but the worst was realizing that she was now left with no one. First Lucas, now Raphael. The plan she believed she could mend was beginning to crumble on all sides. She tried to type something, but the words wouldn't come. The only certainty in that moment was the child she carried. Everything else, the promises, the loves, the expectations, had all dissolved at the same speed she crossed that line months ago. And there was no turning back. The birth happened on a morning that seemed like any other, but for Madison, it carried a weight that couldn't be measured in hours. The pains came intense, with little warning, and when she realized, she was already in the maternity ward with nurses adjusting equipment and doctors asking if anyone from the family would come. She called Lucas with a trembling voice, thinking he might hesitate, that maybe he would say it was better for her to go through it alone. But to her surprise, he said he was on his way. Arrived even before the team released the delivery room. Put on the gown, tied his hair back, and held her hand firmly when the contractions took over. Lucas stayed throughout the labor. Encouraged, comforted, cried. When the baby was born, he held him first. Placed the child in her arms as if holding the whole world. Smiled, looked at Madison, and said that despite everything, that boy was part of him. and that he would care for him with all the love possible. There was no reconciliation in that moment, no promises about a new beginning. But there was respect, presence, and a truth spoken with the eyes: that child would be loved, despite the story behind his arrival. Time passed. Lucas kept all his promises. Went to the appointments, visited the child on weekends, took him to checkups. In the first months, the relationship between him and Madison was cordial. Few words, practical exchanges about schedules, feeding, medicine. But always with care, especially when the child was around. He grew healthy, smiling, and showed affection for both. It was as if, even small, he understood that between the two of them, there was something too delicate to explain. On the first birthday, Madison decided to throw a small party at home. Brought balloons, ordered a simple cake, invited close family. Lucas arrived with the gift already wrapped and the child on his lap. He brought someone with him. A woman with a serene appearance, an easy smile, gentle gestures. Greeted everyone with kindness, including Madison, who only returned with a discreet nod. It was Lucas's new girlfriend. And there, for the first time, Madison realized that the place that once belonged to her had already been filled. The child, upon seeing the father's girlfriend, ran to her arms with familiarity. Laughed, pointed to the balloon and tugged her hand. Madison watched from afar, with a glass in her hand and an internal silence that cut more than any word. Everyone smiled, took pictures, sang happy birthday. She, still alone, watched this new configuration of her own story forming before her eyes. The past no longer weighed on Lucas's shoulders. And his future, it seemed, already had another companion. Meanwhile, she remained there, in the same place where it all began, holding the memory of choices that cost more than she could calculate. And now, only remained to learn to live with it. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.